Hey guys, Savage Joy here with Real Progressives. Tonight I am joined by none other than Levi Sanders. He is running for New Hampshire District 1 congressional seat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Levi.
My pleasure.
And it is Levi's birthday, so yay, happy birthday, Levi. Thank you for joining us on your birthday. That's pretty rad.
I'm most excited about there's not 10 inches of snow, which is projected right now, so that's a good thing. You might hear a lot of howling wind out there, but other than that, things are good.
Yeah, we have 10 inches right now in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
First, can we just set the record straight? Your name is Levi, not Levi.
For some reason, somebody who will not be named decided to name me Levi, even though it's spelled L-E-V-I. So I don't know what that's about, but I'm going to let it go with that.
Oh, okay. So we never explained why.
That's one of the mysteries that we still
Yeah, it's definitely Levi, guys. I promise. So Levi is actually a legal analyst, a husband, and a father of three. He's been thinking about running for something for a while. What was the definitive thing that made you actually throw your hat in and go to that length?
Well, that's a great question. But also, you got to remember, I also have 3 cats in the crate. I got 3 cats.
That's true.
Children, as well as a wife. So I got a lot of stuff going on. But no, that's a great question. So basically, what happened? I don't know if people know who Carol Shea Porter is. She's an extremely progressive member of Congress, and she decided that she wasn't going to run. So basically, I talked to a lot of folks in New Hampshire, my family, colleagues, and I just got a general feeling. Basically, people just said, Levi, you should throw your hat in the ring. You've got some really great ideas. You worked at legal services for 17 years, and as well as prior to that, I worked at one of the largest food shelves in Vermont for 6 years. So I feel like I have a lot of the skills and passion and energy really to effectuate change and really help out low income and working class people as well as the middle class, which, as you know, is basically disappearing.
Right. I think that's important to mention because you have been in public service for decades, which is, it should be a litmus test for politics. So that's definitely advantageous. You are actually, we've talked about this on the phone a lot. You're in a position that literally no one else in the world is in. You have a father who is, known as the most well-known progressive person in our country. And, you're in this situation where you want to run and you deserve to run, but people are kind of, they associate you with the name, but people kind of question, are you going to be, making appearances with Bernard and things like that? So you kind of have to have the task of trying to separate yourself, which it's difficult. Can you kind of touch on that and explain, the process and how you're going about that?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a great question. I mean, the thing is that, when people try to say, well, you're just like, Bernie Sanders, let's understand ultimately that a lot of people are increasingly, basically becoming a Bernie Sanders type politician. What I mean by that is now it's in vogue in terms of a $15 minimum wage, right? Medicare for all. Even folks, congressmen, even in Kentucky, are now saying that's something that a lot of their constituents want, right? So paid equity for women. I mean, these are all issues now that people are saying, really, we're way behind the times, but now we're basically understanding very clearly this is something that is essential in our society, and we're jumping on board. Of course, they're a little late. So I think it's important to understand that while I agree and espouse a lot of the principles of my father is, I'm my own person. Again, as you said, I've been working legal services for 17 years, represent people in a variety of substantive areas of law. And, I feel, confident that I understand a lot of their economic pain because I talk to them every day. And I think basically that I feel pretty confident that I can actually, explain this to the folks of District 1, who I've been talking to a lot, and they're telling me exactly that. They're telling me basically when I talk to people, they talk about the fact Medicare for all. They talk about the issue of tuition-free colleges and universities. And what's amazing, Joy, about this is that for some reason people perceive this as like a foreign concept. That they don't understand what goes on in much of the world. Obviously, as you know, in Scandinavia, where people not only go to college, but they can go to graduate school, right, in certain areas. So I think psychologically, what I think is really important to understand basically is that people are so beaten down in our society that they don't even feel deserving. So when we talk about the issue in terms of why people don't vote or whatever, one of the things we have to understand is basically get to the point in terms of empowering folks to say basically that they matter, because that's one of the key issues. Like I don't know if you saw I think it was 2 days ago, in terms of the poverty, the 1.5 hour discussion that Bernard had on poverty in terms of the town hall, right? One of the crucial parts that I think that was a little bit that we need to really, really expound on is basically getting people to say that they matter. I talked to so many people in New Hampshire, and they basically say they feel like somehow they've done something profoundly wrong, and that's why they are in the place that they are, instead of understanding that the system is rigged. The fact is, and understanding that they are entitled to have Medicare for all, tuition-free colleges and universities. That women on average, as you know, make 80 cents to the dollar. For Hispanic women, it's down to 56 cents, right? So the reality is once we get people to understand they deserve this, then we can go that next level of getting people really to vote at a much higher rate. And I think that's my concern ultimately, is that we have to just empower people, and we have to build self-esteem. That's a whole other discussion in terms of talking about self-esteem in terms of in grade school. Just one other point I mentioned, which I think is just incredibly important. As you know, in terms of what happened in terms of Parkland, Florida, an absolute tragedy, and yet these high school students did just such an amazing job in terms of taking on the NRA, and doing all of these things to empower themselves as well as kids throughout the country, right? Then we even have in West Virginia, you know that, right? So we have a scenario where the teacher just said enough is enough, and they were successful in terms of getting a very moderate, only a 5% pay increase. But the point is that once people feel that they matter ultimately, and they can connect with other people, then we can effectuate change. But unfortunately, right now, so many people are numb. They're just numb. So when you're numb, it's even worse than actually being in pain, because people don't even know what's going on, in their lives. We have significant problems regarding opiate addiction and a whole host of other issues. I could go on and on, but I just think it's a really important issue to talk about and address.
Absolutely. And speaking about voting and people being disenfranchised and things, after what we saw happen in 2016 with Bern, that's, kind of the root of why people, dem exited and feel so just disparaged and defeated. Given all that, how did you come to decide to run as a Democrat?
It's a great question. Basically, because with the reality is, obviously you have right now, as you know, we have eight different Democrats, and ostensibly, basically, unfortunately, in this day and age, you have the Democrats and the Republicans. So you just don't, in terms of independent, it's a very complicated process in terms of getting on the ballot. At a greater level, if you want to ask in terms of a presidential candidate, it's great ultimately to start a third party, but it's very difficult to sustain it, right? So in terms of independent, unfortunately, that's just not a route right now in New Hampshire that is viable.
Right. I actually hear that a lot with candidates. New Hampshire you're fortunate because that is a same-day voter registration, which is awesome because you don't have to worry about the closed primaries, which is definitely going to help all of you guys. As far as you mentioned, you are running against a number of other people. What are the main differences between you and the other ones? What makes you stand out besides the last name?
Well, as you said, there are eight. There are a total of 8 candidates. So there's 7 other candidates, whatever. So that's a really great case. So the issue in terms of Medicare for all compared to the issue of the Affordable Care Act, right? So that'd be a difference, right? And again, unfortunately, it hasn't really been fleshed out in terms of the other candidates. So I don't really, it hasn't really I don't really know in depth what a lot of these other candidates are espousing. But the simple fact is, basically, when you look at the issue of Medicare for all, right? So the great thing about Medicare for all is ultimately you're not going to have co-payments, deductibles, premiums, as we know is going up and up, right? So some of the folks, based on what I see, think the Affordable Care Act is the way to go. And the problem, as you know, ultimately is that while it's good, it doesn't address all of the significant problems that people have. People have profound levels of anxiety even going to the hospital. I mean, it's just amazing, Joy. When you look at the issue of a deductible, when I talk to people in Europe, they literally can't understand. It doesn't make logical sense in terms of why one would have a deductible. It's just illogical. They can't understand it. And the problem, unfortunately, with us is we've been so beaten down that we don't even understand the reality in terms of what goes on in the rest of the world, and particularly in terms of industrialized countries, whereby people have the assurance and the confidence that then when they go to the doctor or the emergency room, that they're not going to be potentially bankrupt. Right? That's a huge issue. A lot of anxiety that goes on. So I mean, these are all issues. So again, I wish I could elaborate out. We're kind of early on the campaign. I can articulate but I don't really know a lot, to be honest with you, about my other candidates' viewpoints in depth.
Well, and that could be a problem for, it's not for you. It's actually good for you.
Sure.
But I think, because a number of people know quite a bit about you, and that's, what you're kind of supposed to do as a candidate. So it seems like a lot of concern comes from the district you chose to run in. And I assume it's strategic. Can you just kind of touch on that and just kind of, explain it to the people who are questioning that move?
Well, first thing is, obviously, from a constitutional basis, I have a right to. So the thing is, I live in an area which is Claremont, New Hampshire. So if you look at that district, that goes from the Claremont, and it's also an area which is in Concord. So that's about 15 miles from the district ultimately I'm running in. So the argument is not a great argument. So the point is, I'm only 15 miles away if, in fact, I would be in another district, right? So the reality is that, but the biggest issue ultimately is that I have worked in, legal services for 17 years. But more importantly, I have actually been a New Hampshire resident for 15 years. Pay taxes for 15 years. My kids go to the public school system. So I think, overall, when you look objectively, and the main thing is when I talk to people, they don't say, hey, by the way, what district are you in? What they say is that, you know what? I agree with you wholeheartedly. I do think everybody's entitled to have health care. Everybody is entitled to have education in terms of going up to, say, college or, even trade schools or whatever. The reality is, Bob, is that people are fixated, actually a very small percent are fixated without talking about the issues. I think we owe it to the people of New Hampshire to talk about the issues that they face every day and what we can do, as a congressman or a congresswoman to try to address those issues.
Right on. And I think, that's something that people are getting really frustrated about. That's why I'm very proud to be part of independent media. You've also spoken about, you turn on MSM and all you see is Stormy Daniels and all this salacious tabloid crap. So how do you kind of defer to what's important when people ask you these things?
Well, the first thing I think what's really exciting now is with our little iPhone now, we can become a journalist. We can reach out technically to millions of people, whether in terms of this country or throughout the world. So that's pretty exciting. So we have the ability to take on mainstream media and say, basically, you know what? While I understand for the media that Stormy Daniels is important or the latest scandal is important, for average day Americans, they're concerned ultimately about the fact that, for instance, as you're probably aware, you have so many people that work 40 hours or more and still are in poverty. Why is that the case? Let's discuss that. Let's talk about the issue in terms of why it is that for so many college students, they are so profoundly and deeply in debt. It's very difficult for them to kind of choose what they're going to do with their career. it's amazing that in fact you have doctors, nurses, lawyers that want to go into and do really good and positive work for society. But unfortunately, they're so anxious and nervous that they're going to be $180,000, $200,000 in debt that they probably don't do it. And as you know, we desperately need rural doctors as well as lawyers in terms of legal services and the public defender's office. But ostensibly, if you're $200,000 in debt, you may question going that route.
Absolutely. So on the subject of college, you do believe in tuition-free college. Is that something that you would like to see for the entire country? Absolutely.
It's absolutely essential. See, it's not the right thing to do. Economically, it makes sense, right? If ultimately, you have more people in college, or whatever, or in other type of, whether it's trade school, whatever. The bottom line here is this: we know this, Joy. This is an incredible statistic that we have. Virtually 44% of folks, ultimately making $15 or less an hour in this country, right? So the reality is basically we have a very serious problem, but we also have a lot of jobs that are available that because people don't have necessarily the skills or the college experience, they can't take those jobs, and a lot of employers get frustrated. So it's a win-win situation. It will help the economy so much if in fact we have an extremely well educated workforce.
Absolutely. Do you think are you a supporter of the federal job guarantee?
Absolutely.
Awesome. That, for those watching who don't know too much about it, basically, if you want to work, you're given a job. It's that simple. That way, homelessness goes down, poverty goes down. It's something that we could do, that needs to be done. So that's really good that you support that.
And just to add to what you're saying, I mean, unfortunately, people beat up on folks that ultimately are having a hard time getting work. But the reality is that when I talk to people, it builds self-esteem, it builds self-worth, obviously, to work. So when you talk to people, they want to work. And there's a whole host of reasons why they're not able to. So basically, we know obviously in other countries, basically, that they empower folks. So we need to do everything possible to make it worth their while. Because the problem is, unfortunately, for a lot of single parent moms, what are they supposed to do? They ultimately have to work and they have to pay child care, all these other issues. And it's just not, they can't do it. They can't do it economically. You have to have a way to basically have it, particularly for women who are on average at 80 cents a dollar, at least if you have a minimum wage at $15 an hour. That's significant because if you have a minimum wage, that means ultimately employers are going to be paying more than $15 an hour for jobs that are $18, $17, $18 an hour. So it's just, yes, it's definitely a great thing.
Absolutely. And on that note, we are learning a lot about not Trump supporters, but Trump voters, who, a lot of times people don't understand how to differentiate them, but whether you agree or not, there are many people who voted for him because they had hope he was going to do something for them job-wise, because he's this businessman and what have you. Right. And you've been speaking to a lot of those Trump voters who are not supporters of him, but who are disenfranchised and just wanted the comfort of getting a job and that security. What is something you found while speaking with those people?
Let me first say, I think it's very important. I think, there are a certain segment of Trump supporters who are racist, sexist, homophobes, right? But the vast majority of folks, basically, we talk about this, they were not. They basically just decided they were working 2 or 3 jobs. They barely making ends meet. They had virtually no health care. They had no dental care. And they said, you know what? We got this guy, a billionaire, whatever, and we have nothing to lose. The other important thing to understand psychologically is when people are in pain, they like to go and judge other people. It makes them feel better about themselves. So what Donald Trump did is he used those tactics. He said, you know what, this is an interesting point I was just thinking about. if you ultimately are in a situation where you're not doing great, but if the Republicans and other folks who are conservative like that are saying basically, you know what, you're not doing great, but you know what, you could be a lot worse off. Psychologically, people have that anxiety. Instead of empowering people and say, you know what, you're not doing great and you deserve to go up, go up and make $15 an hour. So that's the difference. So what's happening now, ultimately, for so many people, they're so anxious and nervous, ultimately, they are saying to themselves, which is unfortunate, they're just thankful to be where they're currently at in society, and that's extremely problematic. I would say one thing, Joy, that I think one of the greatest quotes that I could think of is basically, you can only consent to feeling inferior, and I talk to people about that. If you don't allow people, in terms of consent, that's the problem. It's this issue where people feel powerless because they somehow think that people can kind of dictate how they think and behave. And what you have to understand ultimately is if you don't give people, in terms of consenting, then you ultimately won't feel inferior. You'll feel good about yourself. And that's a whole host of issues I think is really important to talk about, is basically what we do to just empower people and make people feel, that they're okay and that people matter.
I totally agree. And the interesting thing is, I'm sure some of the viewers watching can pick up on this. The conversations we've had, I love the fact that you always talk about things psychologically. I'll tell you something and you'll say, and why do you think that is? And that's a really, really good trait that I don't see that much with politicians or people running for things, because we cannot fix things unless we know why they are the way they are. So your analytical skills, I think, are a huge advantage to why you're passionate about these things. You're also a vegetarian, and you kind of educated me on the connection with environmental issues. Can you expound on that?
I mean, sure. Ultimately, I'm not going to tell people. I'm not the kind of person to say, it's imperative to become a vegetarian or a vegan. People can do what they want. But it's just a much better situation for the environment, basically, in terms of the fact it's just, you have a scenario where it's so difficult ultimately when you're raising cows and cattle and pigs and whatever like that. It's just not good for the environment. It's just something that I can talk for a long time, but ostensibly whatever like that, it's just profoundly problematic.
Yeah. What else what else are you passionate about as far as the environment?
Well, as you know, I'm most passionate about the fact that, number one, that global warming is real, contrary to what Donald Trump and other people, and it wasn't perpetuated by the Hollywood elite, right? That obviously it's imperative that we address what's going on, throughout this world. We just have a scenario where basically things are just completely out of control. I'm passionate in terms of what's going on, in terms of Antarctica and throughout the world. Basically you see, sea level rising, whatever, and there's just, even in New Jersey and other places, basically. I'm just passionate about the sea. It's so tricky because it's important to understand when it comes to the environment that we have the ability to effectuate change. And we have to do that basically in terms of educating people at a very deep level in terms of the issue of water and all these other issues. Basically in terms of with climate change, what happens obviously is that you have a scenario where increasingly you're going to have people throughout the world fighting, or even the United States, for a basic thing such as water. We know very clearly ultimately in terms of bottled water, ultimately there's so much water is drying up all over the place. So, there's obviously issues in terms of climate change related to cancer, and there's a whole host of stuff. And I just think basically that we have one planet, and and actually we have to do everything possible to do the best we can to make sure that it's healthy and habitable.
And water is something you've been talking about for before I even met you, about 8 months ago. You've been talking about, not just Flint, but, people, these things, maybe not to that severity, but they are going on all over the country. And you have been communicating with people in Michigan. Can you kind of describe the things you're hearing from them?
Yeah, I mean, so what's amazing in Flint, Michigan, is that you talk to, it doesn't matter whether it's Flint or Michigan, there is a serious problem regarding water and healthy, water. So it's not, it's not just a low income issue. While Flint, Michigan is the worst scenario, the point is Michigan and other states have a very serious problem regarding water. And unfortunately, you have a lot of bottled watering plants that use that and take advantage of people as well as the environment. So the bottom line is we have to talk about the connection between water and economics. So the point is for wealthy folks, they may have a better ability to get cleaner water. But for a lot of low income folks and working class people, they can't, and that actually has profound effects, as we know, in terms of the lead poisoning in terms of water and how that affects childhood development. There's just a whole host of issues that go on when it comes to not having healthy water.
I'm actually going to take a question from an RP teammate. She wants to know, how do you feel about the way the Democratic Party is basically smearing progressives and kind of trying to inhibit us from democracy, essentially, all the things that are going on. How do we, I don't know if change is the right word, but how can we move forward from that?
I mean, the most important thing to understand basically is that, we stay focused on the issues and we talk about the issue of a $15 minimum wage, which would be colleges and universities, where paid equity for women, transgender rights, all these other issues, talk about the issue of, that we need paid family leave. I mean, it's unbelievable. If we talk about those issues increasingly, what's happening increasingly is that while they're, whether it's smeared or not, they are beginning to take our side. They're beginning to take our issues and putting them into their platform. So I think the bottom line in all these issues is to kind of stay focused on the message, continue to bring more and more people out. People are beginning to understand ultimately that it's unacceptable in terms of the super delegates. I think we're at the point now that, increasingly, I just had a meeting yesterday and everybody, there was telling me basically that we have a real opportunity in New Hampshire and other places to do away with super delegates. So that's something that really is a reality. And I just think the bottom line is we continue to stay passionate, we continue to talk about the issues and bring more people in the political equation. I really believe, obviously, that the Democratic Party will become a Big Tent party, which obviously is necessary, bringing in low income and working class people into the political equation.
Do you think that, I know the majority of progressives feel like the one factor that just kind of supersedes everything is big money in politics. How do you feel about that?
Oh my goodness. Your campaign finance reform, Citizens United, probably one of the most disastrous Supreme Court decisions of all time. I mean, the reality is it's got to be one person, one vote. I mean, the reality is that lobbyists right now are just playing an incredibly, profoundly bad role. I mean, when people have to raise like $1.5 million, to run for Congress, I mean, that's just a real problem because a lot of folks just can't do it. And it's about the ideas, it's about the mission, it's about the passion. And that's really what it's got to be about. And unfortunately right now is that with negative ads and character assassination, it proves extremely problematic. We know ultimately some of the stuff that's been going on in terms of other campaigns where trying to hurt people's credibility and making statements that are not based in reality and fact. Unfortunately, that some people ultimately will read something and then they won't really get the full breadth of what's going on, and then they will have serious concerns about a candidate instead of staying focused and looking objectively, speaking at the issue.
That's actually one thing that you absolutely amaze me on. You handle that like a champ. When people come on your profile or something like that, you stay classy and you don't let it get to you. I, on the other hand,
obviously, when it gets, I think the bottom line is you have to understand, again, what I said before, you can only consent to feeling inferior. So the reality is basically if somebody says something to you, okay, fine. That's when you analyze it from a political level, like say on a political candidate, if somebody attacks you, what they're basically saying is they don't have any ideas of their own. And the point is that they have to criticize you because they can't express themselves, in a clear manner. So, but I believe wholeheartedly in the First Amendment. I think it's just absolutely so important, and it is clear that Donald Trump would love to do away with the First Amendment,
yeah.
So many ramifications within that, and that's actually a little sideways. But the thing I would say to you is that within the First Amendment, it's so important that high school students understand, as well as grade school students, that when you walk in the school door, you don't lose your First Amendment rights. People don't understand that. Whether it's teachers or whatever like that, it has to be disruptive in nature. So you have all these kids who are being suspended, as you know, in Tennessee, you have these children who literally, you talk about being beaten down, they're physically beaten as a result of, deciding to use their First Amendment right. And I would argue that's an Eighth Amendment violation under cruel and unusual punishment. So what's happening ultimately right now is that a lot of society, the establishment, administrators are becoming increasingly nervous because children, young adults, are, unions, they're beginning to get a voice. And once you get that voice, nothing can stop you. Because once you take on, when one school takes on an administration and says, this is unacceptable, we're willing to take you on, then other schools are. We know ultimately in terms of what's going to go on the 24th, be extraordinary in terms of all of the protests, of what's going on, all the marches are going to go on. It's just extraordinary. And I think the most important thing basically that we can learn from, all these amazing high school students is that we have to understand that, if we ultimately take people on individually, it's much different. But if we bring a lot of people into the political equation, that we can definitely take on what's going on in terms of the establishment, and particularly.
Never ever lose your sense of outrage.
Right. I'm not sure exactly said that, Joy, but yes, I do remember that.
I heard it somewhere. I'm not sure where I picked it up. So, as far as poverty, you were speaking about that. Is that rampant in your district in New Hampshire?
Well, that's a really good question. So basically, in many ways, and it's really interesting you say that, because New Hampshire ultimately, in many ways, has a lot more money overall in terms of that a lot of other states. But there is very significant poverty, particularly in our district. And one of the questions ultimately is within poverty and all these other issues, there is a level of despair that occurs. And so, just to make a little segue, I don't know if you know McDowell County, West Virginia, which has the highest rate in terms of opiate deaths or whatever. There's a very serious addiction problem. But New Hampshire is either 2 or 3, depending on what in terms of studies. So it's a very serious problem there. And there is, and that's why I think people are ready for change. The problem, unfortunately, is that a lot of folks who are working class and low income just don't vote because they don't think it matters in their lives. So, our goal ultimately is to say, that you matter, that your family matters, and that the stuff that we're talking about is gonna have a significant and profound change in your life. So, right. So the point, if you have a Medicare for all, you're not going to have that anxiety I talked about earlier in terms of racking up thousands of dollars in terms of healthcare costs, right? Or the issue of tuition-free colleges and universities, having that confidence that you can go to college and not be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. So, yeah, there is a very serious, and significant poverty, but unfortunately, it's very hard to get a lot of these folks out because they're so exhausted in terms of the day when they're working 2 or 3 jobs, barely make ends meet. You just don't unfortunately have the time or the energy to get involved in politics. So we have to change that.
Yeah, totally agree. And speaking of the importance of voting, when I was researching the incumbent who decided not to run, Carol Shea Porter, something that I found was that she won by 1%. Is that correct?
Yeah, what's crazy about that, it went back and forth. It went Carol Shea Porter, and then it went her opponent, then Carol Shea Porter, and back and forth. So it was Frank Ginta, Carol Shea Porter, it was Frank Ginta, and it went back and forth. So you're right, you're really dealing about 1.8 to 2% in terms of kind of a different, so it goes back and forth every single time. That's a really great point. Yeah, no, it's definitely, it's always very, very close to 2 points. So the question at hand basically is whether we can get people, to get, mobilize them, to get them registered to vote, and to talk about the issues and connect with these folks in a way that unfortunately a lot of politicians don't. And that obviously deals with the whole media and really kind of understanding that they basically, that these folks matter, and basically that in terms of having role models, all these issues are just so extraordinarily important. And unfortunately in this day and age, people turn on the TV and they say, you know what, the stuff that I'm watching doesn't affect my daily life. So, it doesn't matter to me. So, I think we have an obligation to take on, mainstream media and basically say, you know what, if you don't do it, then we're going to do some boycotting, and we're going to take on situations and say, enough is enough. It is absolutely essential that we have low income and working class people involved in mainstream media, because I understand it's about ratings like that, but people deserve and are entitled to have the media play a significant role in their life.
Agree. And when it comes to voting, what do you think, because of all the things that happened in 2016, where California, 3 million votes end up in boxes, never counted. In New York, over 3 million people unable to vote because they were independents, things like that. Are you in favor of same-day voter registration, open primary, paper ballots? What are your thoughts as far as making it easier for us?
Well, the first thing ultimately, we need to have paper ballots. That's absolutely essential. We need to have paper ballots, because we know very clearly in terms of some of these machines, ultimately they are owned, from other politicians. I mean, basically, we talked about that. So that's a massive conflict of interest. We need to get independents involved. And we know obviously very clearly in New York or whatever, it was very difficult. 6-9 months to change your party affiliation. They just made life very, very difficult. Bottom line is, we have to make it as easy as possible for people to vote, not as difficult, right? So obviously in certain states, whatever, to have a voter ID, to have your driver's license, have all this stuff, we just basically have to say, obviously you're a citizen, you're entitled to vote. I mean, at a billions, people who voted, there is very, very little, literally infinitesimal in terms of voter fraud. Unfortunately, you have some folks ultimately that somehow think there's a serious problem.
As far as I'm sorry, like as far as your district or even your state, do you guys have a lot of for-profit prisons?
We have a lot of for-profit prisons. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what are your thoughts on that?
The bottom line here is that, unfortunately, I mean, just to give you how crazy it is, with conjugal visits or whatever like that, we now increasingly have a scenario where people have to pay $29.99 for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, to talk to their significant other. It's completely crazy. We have a scenario where ultimately it's a big business to lock people up. So we have to radically change that. We have to ultimately understand basically that a lot of folks who are in prison are for violent, issues, substance abuse issues. So we have to do a lot better in terms of mental health. We ultimately know that, mental health counseling, there is just a crisis. Then it's about priorities. And the simple fact is that we have to understand that people, when, they go, first of all, the other issue, of course, is so important that for so many folks that have come out of prison or whatever like that, that they're not entitled to vote. So there's a lot of states like that, and that absolutely has to change. people make mistakes. That's what happens. They do what they need to do in terms of getting so they're saying prison. They get out of prison. They should have that right to vote. So I mean, obviously, this whole for-profit prison stuff is very, very bad. And we definitely.
And do you support marijuana legalization?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because that'll cut down for-profit prisons right there. All the people of color locked up for that. I know that just made a lot of people very happy. I'm looking at the comments.
It makes logical sense. Are you kidding me? I mean, with all the things, whatever your thoughts are in terms of, to say that marijuana, which is not even, it's not something that is a serious quote drug. I mean, we have serious stuff. We can debate a lot of issues, but with marijuana, absolutely.
Do you? Somebody had a question about farms by you. How is the farming? I don't want to say industry, but are people making a living having their farms?
Well, increasingly, it's extremely difficult. Unfortunately, it's cost prohibitive now for a lot of farmers to sell their milk or whatever. And again, that's about priorities. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, we have Agri-Mart, and we have a lot of large places that are taking over. So a lot of small farms are having a real difficult time surviving. So yeah, it's definitely a very, very serious problem. Some good people all of us have been working. Sorry?
I see a lot of comments about something we talk about like nonstop on Real Progressives, MMT. It's something that I know you know who Stephanie Kelton is, Burns' economic advisor, and she teaches it at the Sanders Institute, and she also had a talk with Jane on an interview a couple of weeks ago. Are you familiar with MMT?
No, I gotta be frank. I didn't watch that whole interview. So why don't you just give me a quick synopsis? I know a little bit, but
yeah. I'll totally send you a couple short videos and a few articles. It means that federal taxes don't fund spending, meaning we already have the means to pay for every single thing we're talking about.
Right. But what was Stephanie Kelton specifically talking about? Wasn't she talking about the issue of college loans or something?
College educations, loans, things like that. That basically they don't need to happen, essentially, and we have a way to cancel them out. I'll definitely send you some information. It's really good to learn about because then you realize that we don't have to wait on some of this stuff or cut back this to obtain this or what have you. What else is on your platform that you're really passionate about?
Well, I mean, I think the main thing, obviously, is really just, as I said, right now in New Hampshire, the $7.25 minimum wage. So, I mean, the reality is we just have to get it, to $15 an hour. I mean, in terms of what's going on.
Is 15 a minimum, or do you support it higher than that, or is 15?
Of course, I support it, but the reality is basically what ultimately can be passed, right? So, ideally, a lot of folks ultimately would want to go higher. But where we're at right now, ultimately, is $15 minimum. And then, right, exactly. And then it's just, but I think my main thing is obviously in terms of childhood poverty, right? So we have a scenario where we know that 20% of children live in poverty. But when you look really objectively, it's a lot higher. So ultimately, how do we tap in and address those issues? How do we ensure ultimately that we have more shelters, more public housing, more Section 8, things ultimately that will help out. Unfortunately, right now, Ben Carson, whatever, he's trying to make it as difficult as possible. Like he made a quote. He basically said straight up, he goes, I want to make the shelter, as difficult as possible for people to live in, so ultimately they can, quote, get out on their own and find a real job. Well, Ben, clearly, ultimately, if they could, they would. So there's a real disconnect. So it's talking about the issue of, of housing, which is such a, important. And then of course the issue of the opiate addiction. It's just something that is just unbelievable what's going on now. And you have to figure out what is going on, what's happening. There's a lot of theories or whatever, but what I would like to do is just talk to a lot of folks face to face to understand what is really going on in their lives, why are their family members engaging. We know ultimately a lot of stuff is regarding doctors prescribing more drugs, pharmaceutical companies, right? We have that scenario. Issue of just, a profound level of pain and hopelessness. So I think what we need to do is we really need to figure out what's going on. And within that, obviously, it requires us to get more funding in terms of counseling, other type of addiction services that are currently just not available.
Absolutely. I've seen a few comments talking about mental health access and things like that. Do you have any services in the county you're running into? Like, do you have nonprofits or places where people can go if they don't have insurance?
Well, there are some, but unfortunately, increasingly, there's a lot of cuts that are going on. I mean, just to give an example. So, like, even a place where you have needle exchanges, that's been done away with. So, the reality is that there are very, very few. Unfortunately, it's a very serious problem. So there really are very few. Obviously, have to figure that out, and that's about priorities and basically telling the federal government as well as the state government that people matter, people are in pain. We have to address this epidemic that's going on in the country.
Do you I'm just kind of scanning these questions. Who is someone political that you've looked up to? Besides, I mean, probably your dad, but besides that, is there anyone you kind of model your thoughts after, or who inspires you?
Well, I think inspirement. I think politically. I mean, I just look at people throughout history, right? I look at Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, those type of folks. Martin Luther King, right? I mean, these are the people ultimately that Eugene V. Debs. These are people ultimately that are so important. So in terms of a particular person currently, that's kind of difficult because I kind of look at a variety of folks and I try to read and understand the different issues, the philosophies they have, and then try to put that together.
Understandably. Is there something you want to leave our viewers with? What's kind of a final thought that you would like to encourage them to look into more? Oh, by the way, guys, there are donation links in the comments, as well as links to Levi's website, so you can look more into the things we've discussed. Sorry.
But what I would say to Jeremy Corbyn is doing a great job. So, so what's interesting is that if you look at throughout the world, right, there are a lot of folks ultimately that really that we can look to. But again, the bottom line here is this: I'm running because people matter. That people are getting beaten up every day in our society. That people are numb. People are frustrated. People are voting for the likes of Donald Trump because basically they just kind of thrown up their hands. We have a real ability kind of to change that. We know, as we talked about the issue in terms of West Virginia, Parkland, Florida, and a lot of other places that people are basically standing up for themselves as well as others and saying enough is enough. So I think, from my perspective, I think it is essential that, all politicians believe in a $15 minimum wage with tuition-free colleges and universities, paid equity for women, a variety of issues. The issue, obviously, which is so important in terms of what's going on right now in terms of disparity, where you have, in essence, the 99% versus the 1%, right? I mean, as you know, we currently have, in terms of Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett, these three individuals own more wealth than half the nation. That is a significant problem. And yet we have 44% of the folks who are homeless who are working. So the reality is, is that we have to have this, where those 44% of homeless, we need to figure out. We are the most wealthiest country in the world, and and we have a lot of great Americans. And I think that if you look and you talk to people and you analyze what's going on in society, I think if you ask people on the street, most people ultimately will tell you that they have a very serious problem when so many people have so little, or a very small percentage of people have so much. That's kind of my story. I'm sticking to it.
Absolutely. And I have to say, out of many phone conversations with you, that's something that always stands out to me, that you are focused on people. You always have been since I've known you. Real Progressives does not endorse people as an organization, so I don't want people to get that twisted. But I myself, as an activist, do endorse Levi Sanders 100%. He's been a mentor to me for a few months, and I know he wants what's right for New Hampshire and for our country, and I fully endorse him.
You say, Joy, you run an absolutely incredible show. I mean, particularly in terms of a shoestring budget. Actually, when I say literally, like, not even a shoestring budget. So the reality is, what you do is just absolutely phenomenal. You push people, which I think we need to make people feel uncomfortable and ask the tough questions and get people nervous and sweating, and get politicians really to really do the right thing. Because right now we have a situation, as you're probably aware, where the Republican Party is trying to cut Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. And we have to do everything possible to stop it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Levi. I know this is kind of an exclusive. You haven't really done any independent media interviews. So I hounded you for quite a while and you relented. So thank you so much. And do you want to just, for people who didn't see it in the comments, do you want to just give your website and Facebook and all that fun stuff?
Sure. So SandersForCongress.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Levi.
There's a link you can actually check in terms of Twitter and Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I always love talking to you, and best of luck with everything. And for those watching from New Hampshire, the primary is actually not until September 11th. So you have a while to research and everything like that. But definitely look into Levi. It's more than just his dad. He definitely deserves to be in this race and to have a voice at the table. I genuinely believe he wants what's best for us. So I definitely encourage you to check him out. And once again, Levi, thank you so much for joining us.
My only thing to say is that the most important thing is ask tough questions and don't engage in hero and heroine worshiping. Everybody, we have to understand that we all have a right to ask the tough questions of politicians and demand answers, ultimately, that a vast majority of us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for watching. Please share on your pages. And thank you guys so much. And Levi, best of luck and take care.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And happy birthday.
Oh, I got to eat my birthday cake. It's late, but I'm like,
yes.
I'm going to be scared.
Night, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.